The ancient world was a tapestry of dust, conflict, and divine whispers. In this world lived a man named Abram, later known to us as Abraham, a patriarch whose faith would shape nations. The book of Genesis tells us of a desperate time when his nephew Lot was captured during a brutal war between city-states. Abraham, a man of courage and loyalty, gathered his trained men, a small but formidable force of 318, and pursued the victorious kings. He fought fiercely under the cover of night, not for glory or for treasure but for family. He was victorious, rescuing Lot and reclaiming all the people and possessions that had been stolen. It is on his weary journey home, his mission accomplished, that the story takes a sudden, unexpected turn, introducing one of Scripture's most profound enigmas. Emerging from the historical narrative almost as if from a dream, a new figure steps onto the stage. He is not a warrior returning from battle, nor a diplomat seeking a treaty. He is Melchizedek, and his arrival is both quiet and momentous. He appears in the valley of Shava, which the text tells us is the King's Valley, a place of royal significance. There is no warning, no introduction to his lineage or his history. He simply is. This sudden appearance is a powerful storytelling device, forcing the reader, and Abraham himself, to focus entirely on who this man is in that very moment, rather than where he has come from. His presence immediately shifts the atmosphere from one of military triumph to one of sacred reverence, a profound pause in the chronicles of a violent age. He carries with him not weapons of war, but the humble elements of sustenance and fellowship, bread and wine. This act of hospitality coming from a king is remarkable in itself. It is a gesture of peace and restoration offered to a man returning from the chaos of battle. Melchizedek doesn't ask Abraham for an account of the fighting or a share of the spoils of war. Instead, he offers nourishment and blessing, a divine welcome that transcends the earthly victory Abraham has just secured. This meeting is not between two military commanders or two tribal chieftains. It is a spiritual intersection, a moment where the divine order breaks through into the human story in a way that is both simple and deeply mysterious, setting the stage for a legacy that would puzzle scholars for millennia. The scene is brief, occupying only a few verses in Genesis, yet it is packed with a significance that reverberates throughout the rest of the Bible. Abraham, the great patriarch, the friend of God, the man who would become the father of a multitude of nations, stands before this king. And in this moment, it is Abraham who is the recipient of a blessing, not the giver. It is Abraham who acknowledges the authority of this enigmatic ruler. The encounter between these two men is a pivotal event, a quiet hinge on which a much larger story of priesthood, sacrifice and redemption will eventually turn. It plants a seed of mystery that will not fully blossom until centuries later, in the prophecies of Psalms and the theological arguments of the New Testament. The titles given to Melchizedek are not merely honorary, they are profound descriptions of his very nature and his kingdom. The Bible tells us he is the King of Salem, a title that immediately grounds this mystical figure in a real physical place. The name of his city, Salem, is derived from the Hebrew word shalom, which means peace. Therefore, Melchizedek is, quite literally, the King of Peace. In a world defined by constant tribal warfare, territorial disputes, and the sword, a king whose reign is synonymous with peace is an extraordinary concept. He represents a different kind of rule, one not based on conquest or domination, but on tranquility and wholeness. His kingdom is a sanctuary, an island of serenity in a turbulent sea of human conflict. But his identity is twofold. He is not only a king, he is also a priest of God Most High. This combination of roles is incredibly rare in the biblical narrative. In later Israelite society, the monarchy and the priesthood were intentionally kept separate. Kings were typically from the tribe of Judah, while priests had to be from the tribe of Levi, descendants of Aaron. This separation of powers was a cornerstone of their law. Yet here in Genesis, long before the law of Moses was given, we find a man who embodies both royal authority and priestly sanctity. He rules his people with justice and also stands before God on their behalf, a perfect fusion of earthly leadership and heavenly service. This unique dual role marks him as a figure of exceptional spiritual and political importance. Furthermore, his very name, Melchizedek, is a key to understanding him. In Hebrew, the name is a combination of two words, Melech meaning king and Sedek meaning righteousness. So his personal name translates to King of Righteousness. When you combine his name with his title, you get a remarkable portrait of a leader who is the embodiment of justice and the ruler of a city of peace. He is not just a king who strives for righteousness, his very identity is king of righteousness. This suggests that his rule is not flawed or subject to the whims of human fallibility but is a perfect expression of divine justice on earth. He represents an ideal form of governance that humanity has always yearned for. The place he rules, Salem, is widely believed by scholars to be the ancient name for the city that would one day become Jerusalem. This adds another layer of profound significance to his story. Jerusalem, the city of peace, would become the holy center for Judaism and Christianity, the site of the temple, and the location of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. The idea that this holy city was first ruled by a king of peace and a priest of God, Most High establishes a spiritual foundation for Jerusalem that predates the Israelite conquest. It suggests that God had already established a sacred presence in this place, long before it became the capital of King David's kingdom. Melchizedek, therefore, is the original priest-king of the city that would become the focal point of God's redemptive plan. One of the most striking and intentional details about Melchizedek is what the Bible doesn't say about him. In a text like Genesis, where genealogies are meticulously recorded and family lines are of supreme importance, Melchizedek appears without a single mention of his ancestry. We are not told the name of his father or his mother. There is no record of his birth, no list of his descendants, and no account of his death. He steps out of the shadows of history fully formed and vanishes just as quickly, leaving behind only the memory of his sacred act. This deliberate omission is not a historical accident or a lost record. It is a crucial theological point, especially as it is interpreted later in the New Testament. The writer of the Epistle to the Hebrews seizes upon this very point, explaining that Melchizedek is without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. This description elevates him beyond any ordinary human king or priest. Every priest in the later Aaronic or Levitical order had to prove his lineage. A priest's authority was entirely dependent on his ability to trace his family tree back to Aaron, the first high priest. His right to serve in the temple was inherited, a matter of bloodline and documented history. Melchizedek's authority, however, comes from a different source. His priesthood is not based on who his parents were but on who he is, an inherent status granted directly by God Most High. This lack of a recorded family history makes his priesthood timeless and universal. Because he has neither beginning of days nor end of life in the scriptural record, he becomes a symbol of an eternal priesthood. The Levitical priesthood was a continuous chain of mortals. When one priest died, his son took his place. It was a system marked by death and succession. But Melchizedek in the biblical portrayal stands alone, unbound by the cycle of birth and death that defines all other human institutions. His priesthood appears to be perpetual, an unending office. This makes him a perfect type or foreshadowing of a priesthood that does not pass away, one that is not subject to the limitations of human mortality. By presenting him in this way, the Bible creates a category of priesthood that stands apart from, and as we will see, superior to, the one later established under the law of Moses. His anonymity is his power. By stripping him of a personal history, the narrative forces us to see him as a representation of a divine principle. He is not just a man named Melchizedek. He is the embodiment of a different kind of spiritual authority, one that is not rooted in ethnic identity or family records, but in an intrinsic connection to God. This mysterious, ungenealogized priest serves as a silent challenge to the idea that access to God can be restricted by human lineage, opening the door for a more universal understanding of spiritual leadership. The encounter between Abraham and Melchizedek is centered on a powerful and symbolic exchange. As Abraham returns, flush with victory but weary from his ordeal, Melchizedek comes to meet him. The first thing he does is bring out bread and wine. This simple act is layered with meaning. On the most basic level, it is an act of profound hospitality and refreshment. Bread and wine were staples of life in the ancient Near East, symbols of sustenance and celebration. For a weary warrior, this offering would have been a welcome gesture of physical and spiritual restoration. It was a king's provision, a blessing of nourishment that acknowledged Abraham's effort and restored his strength after the violence of battle. Following this offering, Melchizedek performs his priestly duty. He blesses Abraham in the name of God Most High, acknowledging God as the true source of Abraham's victory. He says, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." In this moment, Melchizedek acts as a divine intermediary, articulating the spiritual reality behind Abraham's military success. He redirects the glory from the human warrior to the divine sovereign, teaching Abraham that his strength and triumph come from God alone. This blessing from a recognized priest of God Most High formally sanctifies Abraham's victory and affirms his own standing with God. In response to this profound gesture of provision and blessing, Abraham does something equally significant. The scripture says he gave him a tenth of everything. This is the first mention of tithing in the entire Bible. Abraham, the patriarch chosen by God, willingly gives a tenth of all the spoils of war to Melchizedek. This act is a voluntary expression of honor and submission. By giving a tithe, Abraham acknowledges Melchizedek's superior spiritual status. He recognizes this mysterious king-priest as a legitimate representative of the God he himself serves. It's a powerful moment. The lesser is blessed by the greater, and the blessed, in turn, honors the one who blessed him. This entire exchange is special because it happens completely outside of any established religious law or system. The law of Moses, which would later command the Israelites to tithe to the Levitical priests, would not be given for another 400 years. Yet here, Abraham, the father of faith, instinctively understands the principle of honoring God's priest with a tenth of his increase. This spontaneous act of worship establishes a precedent. The offering of bread and wine and the giving of a tithe create a template of priestly ministry and faithful response that will echo through salvation history, finding its ultimate meaning in the person and work of Jesus Christ, who would also offer bread and wine as a sign of a new covenant. The interaction between Abraham and Melchizedek subtly establishes a hierarchy of priesthoods that the New Testament later makes explicit. The fact that Abraham, the great patriarch from whom the entire nation of Israel, including the priestly tribe of Levi, would descend, paid a tithe to Melchizedek, is a point of immense theological weight. In any culture, the one who receives the tithe is recognized as being in a position of authority over the one who gives it. Therefore, by giving a tenth of his spoils, Abraham was publicly and spiritually acknowledging Melchizedek as his superior. This single act carries profound implications for the priesthood that would eventually come from Abraham's own lineage. The writer of Hebrews argues this point logically and powerfully. He reasons that since the Levitical priests are descendants of Abraham, they were, in a sense, in the loins of their ancestor when he met Melchizedek. Therefore, when Abraham paid a tithe to Melchizedek, the future tribe of Levi, in essence, paid a tithe as well. This demonstrates that Melchizedek's priesthood is of a higher order than the Levitical priesthood. The Levitical system, while ordained by God for a specific time and purpose under the Mosaic law, was subordinate to the more ancient, more universal order represented by the mysterious king of Salem. His was a priesthood not defined by law or inheritance, but by divine appointment. Furthermore, the Levitical priesthood was inherently temporary and imperfect. The priests themselves were mortal men who sinned and had to offer sacrifices for their own failings before they could do so for the people. Their service was a constant, repetitive cycle of animal sacrifices that could cover sin but never truly remove it. It was a system that pointed toward a future, more perfect solution. Melchizedek, on the other hand, is presented as a figure of perfection and permanence. He appears, blesses, receives honor, and vanishes, leaving an impression of a timeless, flawless authority. His priesthood did not require a continuous line of successors because it was, in its very essence, eternal. This concept of a superior priesthood was, honestly, revolutionary. For the Jewish people, the Levitical priesthood was the only authorized way to approach God. It was the bedrock of their worship and their covenant relationship with Yahweh. To suggest that another order of priesthood existed, one that was greater and more ancient, was to challenge the very foundations of their religious structure. But that is precisely the point the Bible seems to be making. It introduces Melchizedek early in its narrative to plant the idea that God's plan for mediation between himself and humanity was bigger than the system he would later give to Israel. He was preparing the way for a different kind of high priest. For nearly 1,000 years after his brief appearance in Genesis, Melchizedek disappears from the biblical record. He remains a silent, mysterious figure from the patriarchal age. Then, suddenly, his name echoes through the corridors of time in a powerful, prophetic psalm. King David, writing under divine inspiration in Psalm 110, pens a royal psalm about a future messianic king. In this short but incredibly significant text, David describes a conversation where God the Father makes a solemn vow to a divine Lord, who David himself calls my Lord. This future ruler is destined to sit at God's right hand and rule over his enemies. In the midst of this prophecy, David records an unbreakable oath from God concerning this messianic figure. In verse 4, God declares, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." This single verse is explosive. It connects the promised Messiah king directly to the ancient priest king of Salem. It reveals that the ultimate ideal ruler would not just be a king like David but also a priest. And crucially, his priesthood would not be of the established Aaronic or Levitical order. Instead, it would be in the order of Melchizedek, a royal, eternal, and superior priesthood. This prophecy created a theological puzzle for ancient Israel. How could their promised Messiah, who was prophesied to come from the tribe of Judah and the lineage of David, also be a priest? The law of Moses strictly forbade kings from performing priestly duties, and priests could only come from the tribe of Levi. King Uzziah, for example, was struck with leprosy for arrogantly trying to burn incense in the temple, a duty reserved for priests. David's prophecy pointed to a future reality where the strict separation of these two offices would be resolved in one person. It promised a figure who would perfectly unite the roles of king and priest, just as Melchizedek had done centuries before. The use of the word forever in the oath is also critical. The Levitical priesthood was a succession of mortal men. Their service ended with their death. But this prophesied priest would serve forever. His priesthood would be endless, permanent, and unchanging. This directly ties back to the timeless portrayal of Melchizedek in Genesis, a man with no recorded beginning or end. Psalm 110 thus acts as a vital bridge, taking the historical account of Melchizedek from Genesis and transforming it into a forward-looking prophecy. It ensures that this mysterious figure is not forgotten, but is instead understood as a blueprint for the greatest priest-king who was yet to come. When we turn the pages to the New Testament, the puzzle of Melchizedek finds its ultimate solution. The Epistle to the Hebrews, in particular, dedicates a large portion of its argument to explaining how Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the prophecy in Psalm 110. The author meticulously connects the dots, showing that Jesus is the great high priest in the order of Melchizedek. This was a crucial argument for early Jewish Christians who were struggling to understand how Jesus, who was from the tribe of Judah and not Levi, could be their priest and mediate their salvation. The answer lay not in the law of Moses, but in the more ancient and powerful precedent set by Melchizedek. The writer of Hebrews explains that Jesus' priesthood is superior to the Levitical system precisely because it is of a different order. Like Melchizedek, Jesus' authority did not come from his family tree, it came from a divine oath, as declared in Psalm 110. His was not a priesthood based on a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. Jesus, being the eternal Son of God, holds a permanent priesthood. Unlike the mortal priests of the Old Testament who died and needed to be replaced, Jesus holds his priesthood permanently, because he continues forever. This means he is able to save completely and eternally those who draw near to God through him. Furthermore, Jesus, as the great high priest, offered a sacrifice that was infinitely superior to the animal sacrifices of the Old Covenant. The Levitical priests had to offer bulls and goats day after day, year after year, in sacrifices that could never truly take away sin, but Jesus offered the one perfect, all-sufficient sacrifice himself. He was both the priest and the offering. He did not need to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. His sacrifice on the cross was the final sacrifice, the one that accomplished what all the others had only pointed towards, the true and complete forgiveness of sins. In this way, Jesus embodies everything Melchizedek represented. He is the ultimate king of righteousness, having perfectly fulfilled God's law and imputed his righteousness to believers. He is the true king of peace, having made peace between God and humanity through his blood. He serves in a heavenly sanctuary, not an earthly one, and his intercession for his people is eternal. The mysterious figure from Genesis who brought bread and wine to Abraham finds his complete identity in Jesus, who instituted the Lord's Supper with bread and wine as a memorial of his own body and blood, given for the life of the world. Melchizedek was the shadow, Christ is the substance. The sheer mystery surrounding Melchizedek has naturally led to centuries of speculation about his true identity. Because the Bible gives us so few details, it leaves room for interpretation, and several compelling theories have emerged over time. Each attempts to solve the puzzle of how a man could appear with such authority and then vanish, seemingly without a human history. These theories range from the historical to the supernatural, each offering a different lens through which to view this enigmatic priest-king. While we may never know for certain in this life, exploring these possibilities helps us appreciate the depth of his character. One of the most popular and ancient theories among Christian theologians is that Melchizedek was actually a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ himself. This is known as a Christophany. Proponents of this view point to the description in Hebrews that he was without father or mother, and had neither beginning of days nor end of life, and that he was made resembling the Son of God. They argue that these descriptions fit no mere mortal. Who else but God the Son could be without beginning or end? In this view, Jesus didn't just become a priest like Melchizedek. He was Melchizedek, appearing to Abraham to establish his eternal priesthood long before his birth in Bethlehem. Another prominent theory, especially in ancient Jewish tradition, identifies Melchizedek as Shem, the righteous son of Noah. According to biblical chronologies, it is plausible that Shem's long life could have overlapped with Abraham's. As a survivor of the flood, and a righteous man who received a blessing from his father Noah, Shem would have held a position of great honor and authority in the post-flood world. This theory provides a human identity for Melchizedek, grounding him in the historical narrative. However, it runs into a significant problem. The Bible explicitly records Shem's genealogy in Genesis. This contradicts the statement in Hebrews that Melchizedek was without genealogy, which is a key part of his theological significance. Other less common theories suggest that Melchizedek might have been an angel appearing in human form, or simply a righteous Canaanite king who preserved the true worship of God outside of Abraham's family line. The angel theory accounts for his sudden appearance and divine knowledge, but the Bible calls him a man and a king of a real city, roles not typically assigned to angels. The idea of him being a righteous Canaanite king is perhaps the most straightforward historical interpretation. It suggests that knowledge of the one true God had not been completely lost among other nations, and that God could raise up faithful representatives wherever he chose. This view emphasizes God's universal sovereignty, showing that his reach extended beyond a single chosen family at that time. In the end, the full identity of Melchizedek remains one of the Bible's most tantalizing mysteries, and perhaps that is intentional. His power in the scriptural narrative comes less from who he was, and more from what he represents. He stands as an eternal symbol of a perfect and righteous rule, a seamless union of royal authority and priestly compassion. He is the King of righteousness and the King of peace, embodying the two qualities humanity most desperately craves in its leaders and its world. His brief appearance in history casts a long shadow, providing a timeless model of ideal leadership that is rooted not in power or conquest, but in justice and reconciliation. His legacy is most profoundly felt in the way he foreshadows the person and work of Jesus Christ. Melchizedek provides the Old Testament framework for understanding Jesus' unique role as our great high priest and king. Without the precedent of Melchizedek, the concept of a priest from the tribe of Judah would be a contradiction. But with him, it becomes a fulfillment. He is the archetype, the pattern shown to the patriarchs, that points toward a greater reality. His offering of bread and wine, his blessing of Abraham, and his receiving of the tithe all serve as foundational elements that find their ultimate meaning in the new covenant established by Christ. For people of faith today, Melchizedek remains a figure of immense hope and significance. He reminds us that God's plan is often bigger and more mysterious than we can comprehend, with threads that connect across thousands of years. He represents a priesthood that is not exclusive or bound by human traditions, but is universal and eternal. This is the priesthood of Jesus, which offers direct access to God for all people, regardless of their background or lineage. It is a priesthood that offers not the blood of animals, but the grace and mercy that flow from a single, perfect sacrifice. His story assures believers that their high priest serves forever, continually interceding for them. Ultimately, Melchizedek's story is a profound statement about peace and justice. He ruled a city called Peace, and his name means King of Righteousness. This tells us that true and lasting peace can only be built on a foundation of righteousness. This is the kind of kingdom the prophets foretold and the one Jesus came to inaugurate. A kingdom where God's justice reigns and true peace is the result. Melchizedek, the mysterious priest-king of ancient Salem, serves as a perpetual reminder of this divine ideal, a beacon of hope for a world still longing for a ruler who is both perfectly just and perfectly peaceful.